Did you know that mitochondria are widely considered to be the powerhouse of the cell? I know this is groundbreaking information, but also, did you know that before they became this powerhouse, they were actually bacteria? They were free floating bacteria that got taken in by other cells, other membranes. And over time, essentially, it became a part of this new organism. It became assimilated into it. It became a new organ within this system, or an organelle as it's technically put. And this process is called endosymbiosis, and in principle, it looks like something that you would only find within fiction, within some kind of comic book or something like that. But after thinking about this for a while, it occurred to me that this process never really stops occurring. Maybe not endosymbiosis per se, but symbiosis itself. If you want to call it life or nature, what it appears to be is some kind of giant symbiote. And you may be thinking, what is this guy talking about? Are you talking about Venom from Spider-Man? Are you trying to say that life is some kind of alien that crash landed on this planet and is trying to enact its own agenda? While I won't directly answer that question with a no, I will bring up that Venom is described as being a parasite. But keep that in mind, because if you are familiar with this channel at all, you would know that there are several key terms that I use to describe the nature of reality. If you are a more rationalist scientific type, you would say that it's all information. If you have a more schizoid type personality, you would say that it's all pattern. And if you are a more empathic, perhaps mystical type, you would say that it's connection or relationships. All of these are words that are used to try and articulate this same thing, this same sentiment. And when it comes to this domain of life, the word that is preferred is relationships, going back to this whole parasite term. We have all of these terms that we use to describe the types of relationships that we see biological organisms forming in nature. There are parasitic relationships, like I previously mentioned. There is commensalism, there's mutualism. But the key takeaway here is that it is all symbiosis, and you'll see that this term symbiosis is very interesting. It is officially defined as a long-term biological interaction between at least two species. And you don't have to think very long to see that this word symbiosis is just a word for nature itself. It is describing the nature of nature. Nature is some kind of symbiote that is comprised up of symbionts. And historically, people have taken this and extrapolated it to mean the actual sentience of nature. I think the most recent and popular example of this is the whole Gaia hypothesis, this idea that Earth itself is some kind of sentient structure, some kind of conscious entity. For example, you can look at what we refer to as cities. You can make pretty convincing arguments that it meets all of the criteria for what we consider to be alive. It grows, it evolves, it adapts, it has metabolism. You could even say that they reproduce. If you are living in a city that has new in the title, for example, New York, New Hampshire, New Orleans, New Jersey, you are living in the offspring of the previous city. The only criteria that you could argue that it doesn't meet is that it isn't made up of cells, but that criteria in and of itself is already highly debated. Many biologists argue that viruses are alive and they aren't made up of cells. But even taking that into consideration, you could say that the people in the city are its cells. Similar to how mitochondria were once free-floating bacteria, you could argue that us, human beings, we were once these nomadic, free-floating organisms that got embedded into these cities. We went from nomads to citizens, the same way that mitochondria went from bacteria to mitochondria. This is often referred to as epigenetic evolution, and although it may sound like I'm making some kind of argument for panpsychism, that isn't what this video is exactly about. Whether we are referring to biological life using the term symbiosis or non-biological organization where we tend to use terms like synergy or symmetry, this is all terminology that we use to address this underlying principle of organization, what it means for something to actually be organized. Symbiosis is just a word used to describe the way that biological life forms organize. And you'll see that this word organization is really weird. It's almost paradoxical because it's counterintuitively unstable. You would think that as things organization, you would think that things become more stable, but the opposite appears to be true. When things organize, something new bursts from it. This is this concept of emergence. Emergent complexity is one of the biggest mysteries that we have going today, and it's one of the few times that magic is actually permitted in science. It's just one of those things that we can't figure out why it happens. Of course, there are certain things that we can explain in various levels of detail, but why something is the way that it is a mystery. For example, returning to this construct of a city, in today's landscape, you aren't really permitted to view a city as an organism, but rather organization. You could say that a city is emergent complexity of large clusters of human beings living together. A molecule is emergent complexity from pairings of specific atoms. We don't know why this happens, it just does. And this topic of emergence is naturally complicated, and I don't want to ruffle anyone's feathers here because I'm no scientist. As I mentioned, the topic of this video is organization, and there's this question that's been bouncing around in my head that no matter which way I answer it, it has some really odd consequences. And that's this question of, is emergence fundamental? I know it sounds like a really odd question. How can something be emergent and simultaneously fundamental? But to rephrase this question so that you understand what I'm getting at, what I'm asking is, are there inert relationships? Is there a such thing as dead ends in nature? Or in other words, is it possible for two factors to have a relationship and for nothing new to be a consequence of that? Or is it the case that every relationship bears some kind of child? It's just that most of these children we can't see. I think a pretty simple and down-to-earth example is this whole cyborg thing. I remember when Elon Musk went viral a couple years ago by saying that we are all already cyborgs. From our perspective, we still view ourselves as human beings with cell phones. We don't view ourselves as cyborgs, even though we carry our phones everywhere like it's a new appendage. So much so that you feel naked when you don't have it. Our technology has become so integrated into us, or we have become so integrated into it that it's become a part of us, similar to the whole mitochondria thing. And due to this relationship, we have, as a result, become something new. There was emergent complexity that is born from this relationship, and we call this emergent complexity being some kind of cyborg. It's kind of like if you hopped in a time machine and went back to feudal Japan and you saw all of these people walking around with swords. You wouldn't say those are human beings with swords. You would call them warriors or samurai. You would say that they are in this warrior class. And perhaps the way that history will read, or if someone hopped in a time machine and came back to look at us, we would be this class of cybernetic humans. I know it's pretty odd to look at it that way, but if you take this simple concept and extrapolate it to its most fundamental level, it suggests something really trippy. And when I say fundamental, I sort of mean that literally. You can look at atoms, for example. The identity of an atom is correlated with the amount of protons that it has. If you take any atom and add a proton, it changes its identity. If you take away a proton, it changes its identity. It almost like magic. It just becomes something else. Why? We don't know. It just does it. And we can look at gold, for example, and use this rationalist style logic and argue that gold doesn't have 79 protons. Gold is an emergent property or an emergent complexity of the relationships of exactly 79 protons. And if you change this relationship, you instantly change gold. It ceases to be gold and it becomes something else, some other element. What I'm asking is, does this ever stop happening? Does every instance of a relationship cause a new identity to emerge? Similar to the way that you can combine different colors and get a new color each time, you will essentially never run out of new colors. Is emergence fundamental? Because it appears to be. And if this is the case, what does that say about reality? I think that it changes this word organization and it switches its context. It goes from organization into configuration. Or you can think about it like this, that if we can agree that reality is some kind of result of emergence, and emergence is the byproduct of relationships, instances of relationships, how does this all fit in with something like chaos theory, where we can see that everything is in a relationship with everything else in all kinds of unseeable ways? That the flower pot that's just sitting in your windowsill is somehow connected to the French Revolution, the construction of the pyramids, your hip bone, your future spouse, the dream or nightmare that you had last night. If I were to take this flower pot and place vectors around it that point to everything that it has a relationship with, I would run out of space before I ran out of vectors, which ultimately implies that you would have to fold into some other dimension to finish placing them. Or to rephrase it, if you try to describe everything that a flower pot is, you would run out of language. You would run out of words to describe it. You could describe it using color, using its physical makeup, its weight. There are all of these different categories that you can put it in, but eventually you will run out of words to say about it. However, that doesn't mean that that's all that there is to say about it. If you were able to build some kind of AI or computer that was able to tell you everything that there is to know about this flower pot, it would start off in English and eventually it would just start speaking in a language that to you sounds like complete gibberish. This is what emergence is. You can view it as energy that is phasing through different languages. It is becoming different languages. How does something become a chair? It starts off being in this quantum language, this quantum world. Then it passes into regular physics. Then it becomes chemistry, then biology, and eventually a chair. And if you don't speak any of these languages, then you are just completely out of the loop. This is the big gripe, the big complaint with all of these academic disciplines today. They feel like they are the only ones who know the language, so they are the only ones who get to talk about it. But that's the subject of a different video. The main point is, if everything has this incalculable amount of relationships with everything else, there appears to be a whole lot of missing emergence. Where is all of the emergence? Maybe I'm looking at it wrong or weird, but the way that I see it, we should be embedded in this matrix of just unbounded emergence, this boundless emergence. It should be some kind of state of this hyperdense interconnectivity. Kind of like those viral social media posts of these various computer simulations. I don't know if you've seen them, but they normally start off with a ball bouncing around in some kind of geometric shape, normally a circle, and a condition is given. It would be something like each time the ball bounces and comes into contact with a circle, another ball is added, and eventually it just exponentially explodes. More and more balls are added, and as they come into contact with more things, more and more is added until the simulation crashes. Everything becomes so densely packed that the computer just can't make sense of it anymore because the condition winds up being in a state where it's constantly being fulfilled. This is kind of what I mean by this principle of emergence. This is kind of how things should be. And this is where I reach a point where it's really hard to translate what I mean or put it into words, but I can just say that everything should be able to happen and nothing should make sense. But as we look around, we can clearly see that things make sense. Reality is ordered. I talk about this in my previous video, how the word became flesh. There are these embedded patterns that are all around us. But then it finally hit me. Nothing actually makes any sense. There is no such thing as things making sense. Things are the way that they are, but there is no obvious reason why things should be one way instead of the other. We've always known this, but I guess it's finally being confirmed via physics that reality is based on symmetry. That's what it all boils down to. This is the most fundamental principle that we've been able to find, and I made a video on it, which I'll have on the screen. But what it means for something to be symmetrical is arbitrary. I was in my apartment the other day just looking around, and there was just all of this stuff everywhere, stuff in the kitchen, stuff on my table, stuff on the floor, and I just thought, what is all of this? You know, I'm weird like that. And it hit me that if you were to just wipe my memory clean, wipe it clean of history, wipe it clean of all information, all of these things in this apartment would just be random objects. And ultimately, that's what everything is. It's just random objects until you begin to apply meaning to it. It's sort of like when you have a child and you place them in a playpen and you give them these toy blocks that they build things with. This is what reality is to us. And maybe life isn't an alien that crash landed on this planet, how I said in the beginning, but consciousness appears to be. And if you prefer this word intelligence, go on right ahead and use that. I remember during the alien craze, the whole UFO craze, how people would give these testimonies about being taken to some strange place with strange things happening and not knowing anything that's going on or happening to them. I think that this is pretty much what consciousness is. We are like these aliens in this strange environment. And there really is no scientific way to discuss this portion of the conversation, and it just so happens to be the most important part of it, which is why I find mysticism so interesting, that we have been naturally intuiting this for thousands of years. Whether or not we got trapped here or decided to be here, everyone has their take on how it went down, but as far as I'm concerned, it's all potato. Some kind of way we all wound up here, this sense of alienation. And when I say we, the part that is most interesting to me is that when I use this we term, we all naturally know that. I'm not talking about us as a primate species. There is something that lies underneath that we all just naturally know what I'm talking about when I say we wound up here some kind of way. We are slowly trying to figure out what's going on. We call this human knowledge. We call this history. We are in this enterprise of trying to make sense of reality, but the catch is that nothing actually makes sense. Or you can look at it this way, that to us, it makes complete and perfect sense that somehow monkeys found a way to have flying cars. But there are ways of viewing this situation as being completely absurd, that if someone came from some other section of reality, it would just appear to be bonkers. It doesn't even have to be some other section of reality. If you just went back in time 500 years, you would be completely alien. It is this alienness that is the true nature of reality, and things only make quote unquote sense when you are referencing it in relationship to memory. Memory is the only thing that makes sense. Or in other words, things only appear to be logical. Things only appear to make sense when you are looking at it with hindsight. It's like the Schopenhauer quote on the 3 stages of truth, that first it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and lastly it's accepted as being self-evident. But the part that's left out is that it is ridiculed because it's ridiculous. If you were to go back in time and say that in the future we'll have flying cars and cell phones and live in these technocratic societies, it would be absolutely ridiculous. And my point is that it still is ridiculous. We've just gotten used to it. The ridiculousness just sort of stabilizes beneath our feet, and this is what emergence is in a nutshell. It is stabilized patterns emerging and bursting into some new alien domain. But once you see how much emergence is missing, how much emergence is still left on the table, or in other words, once you begin to see all of the different ways that things could be, the scope of what's taking place begins to set in. This is all just one version of things. This is why I use this word configuration instead of organization. Everything is actually happening, and don't ask me where or how. I really have no idea, and it's above my pay grade. Perhaps it's some kind of non-local hyperspace. Perhaps this is where you start to hear people talk about simulation theory or this whole many worlds hypothesis, or even just the imagination of God, if you want to call it that. Everybody who really sits down and thinks about this for any extended period of time, they all appear to come to this same conclusion, and they just use the language available to them at the time to try and express it. And this realization is that there is some kind of factor that is capable of facilitating what we perceive to be everything, that is indeed facilitating all possibilities. And it's just whatever you choose to call this factor, I guess that determines where you ultimately land. If you want to call it God, if you want to call it some kind of giant computer, if you want to call it aliens, I don't know. And to be honest, I don't think that we can ever know who's behind all of this, what's going on, or how it's all happening exactly. But surprisingly enough, I think that the only thing that we can know is why. This is the question that everyone hates. They hate this question. I've never seen a question that's quite as polarizing as this question of why. Whenever you really start asking people why, they get uncomfortable. It's almost like there's this fourth wall that something is trying not to break. People aren't trying to get out of character. I really enjoy watching true crime documentaries and detective and police investigation, and these criminals will confess to all kinds of things: where they did it, what time of day it was, how they were able to perform whatever crime. But once it gets down to this question of why, their whole demeanor changes. Or if you're talking to one of these rationalist scientific types and you start asking why, they get all irritated. They think that why is this meaningless question? And that pretty much tells you everything you need to know about their outlook on reality. Why is the most human of all questions. It is probably the first question ever asked, and it is the mother of all of this quote-unquote progress that we currently have. And what seems apparent to me from all of this information that I've gathered, these different universes, alternate timelines, simulations, people often ask, what's the point of all of this? What's the point of this simulation? It appears apparent to me that there is some kind of puzzle. Something is being searched for. Something is searching for something. It's searching for something just like I am. And you may be thinking that I'm just projecting my own mental state onto reality. But trust me, if I could project my mental state onto reality, things would be a hell of a lot different. I'm not projecting my feelings outward. Something is projecting onto me. This factor is projecting onto all of us. We can't control our feelings. This is why acting is so difficult. And most actors will tell you that they aren't just pretending, they're actually channeling something. They are becoming someone else. But I digress. We can't control how we feel. Some people argue that we don't even control what we think. We just learn to cope and deal with our feelings. And this factor is projecting onto all of us. And what everything is doing is searching for something. Whether you are a human being, a particle, an animal, it doesn't matter. Everything is searching for something. You can think of it like this, that we are all inside of this Rubik's Cube type of scenario, or we are all this Rubik's Cube. The official Rubik's Cube has like 40 quintillion possible combinations. Even though each configuration, there's that word again, each configuration has its own unique identity. There is no configuration that is more unique than the other one. There is only one correct solution. And I hope that you understand what I mean by this, or what this implies, that we can set the solution of a Rubik's Cube to any combination, any configuration. One isn't more special than the other. It just so happens that the goal of the Rubik's Cube is to make all of the sides the same color. That's the one that we chose. That's the correct configuration. And you can sort of view this factor as trying to get to this solution, and each turn of this Rubik's Cube, it spits out some other universe. It spits out some other reality. It becomes its own configuration with its own unique identity, its own rules and patterns and ways that things make sense. And I believe that Google came out and said that there are like 10 to the 78th possible combinations of atoms within the universe. But when you really think about the scale of what I'm trying to describe, it really puts that to shame. For example, how many combinations of atoms are there? You can look at it like gold. We can go back to gold. Perhaps there are all of these ways you can combine gold within the way that things are. But what if instead of gold being made up of 79 protons, it was actually made up of 2? And you have this whole different rearrangement of what it means for an atom to be an atom. If you change all of the different identities of atoms, how does that play out? I'm sure there are all of these kooky and wild ways that things could be. And most people by now say things like, this is just absolutely ridiculous. It is stupidity and absurd. And I actually agree. It is absurd, and I think that that is the entire point. There are an infinite amount of ways that reality could be, but there's only one way that it actually is. All Rubik's Cube configurations are equal, but only one is perfect. It is the perfect possibility. Out of all possibilities, there's only one perfect possibility. And this is what the philosopher Leibniz mentioned, how he said that God decides from all of these infinite realities and picks the best one. But I think that we are in some kind of search. We are in some kind of journey to become this perfect possibility. It's not like it's set in stone. There is no sealed fate. Perhaps an analogy is that all of these different possibilities are like seeds that are being planted, and whatever factor this is waiting to see which one will actually grow and bear fruit. Or you can think about it like this to wrap this video up. If when things become organized, there is something that occurs that we call emergence, something new springs forth from it. If you look at the goal of the Rubik's Cube, it is to essentially create a perfect order, a final perfect order. And whatever reality, if you want to call it that, whatever reality is capable of producing this perfect order, a final emergence will spring forth from it, this final level of organization. Perhaps that is the entire purpose of all of this. And as I've stated before, it appears that us learning and things happening is some kind of indistinguishable process. I talked about this in one of my recent videos, which I'll have on the screen. So this implies that there is something that we can learn that makes something happen, and it appears to be our task at hand to continue to grow, evolve, and to try and make sense of what's going on around us, to make sense of reality, but not just in some scientific, cold calculating way, but to also take care of each other, to also grow in a way that's beneficial to everyone and to everything on this planet. Because as we are finding out, it's not like we're going to be able to escape to some other planet, to some other destination. Space is looking pretty desolate, at least the space that we even have dreams of reaching. So if we are able to proceed or to progress further, it's going to be either here on this planet or folded off into some other dimension, or however you want to put it. But we are pretty much finding out that this is our playground. This is what we've been given, the cards that we've been dealt. And we either have to find a way to treat everyone with dignity and respect, or turn this planet into a living hell. And hopefully we make the right decision so that our storyline can progress forward. Who knows? We may become some terminated reality, but that's the story for another video. Please do all of the stuff that YouTube asks. Like the video, comment, subscribe to the channel. I'd like to thank the members of this channel. You are the lifeblood, the life essence of this page. So thank you for your support. And I know that I am overdue over there, and I am working on making more content for you guys. So thank you for being patient with me. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.